Good evening. I am Lacey L. Rice Jr. of the Greater Hardin County Women's Network, welcoming you to the 2022 Hardin County Political Candidates Forum Series, co-sponsored by the Greater Hardin County Women's Network and the Hardin County branch of the NAACP. Tonight, our candidate is running for District 2 U.S. Congressional Representative. Joining us is Hank Linderman. Tonight's format will be a 3-minute opening statement followed by 15 questions. The candidate will have 2 minutes to answer each question. To conclude, Mr. Linderman will have 2 minutes to summarize. As a note, Mr. Guthrie, the incumbent, was invited but did not respond. Tonight's timekeeper is Ms. Lenora Young, representing the Hardin County branch of the NAACP. Mr. Linderman, you have this time to introduce yourself and to present your platform.
Thanks so much, Lacey. Hi, everybody. I'm Hank Linderman. I'm running for Congress here in the 2nd District. When I meet most folks, I introduce myself as I'm a damn Democrat, which usually gets a smile in our divided times. And very often someone will say to me, well, I'm a damn Republican, and we shake hands. I'm running, this is my 3rd time running. As you know, this is a very difficult district. We have an incumbent who's well entrenched, who's been there for 14 years. And you know, most of the races for Congress are very difficult to unseat an incumbent. And for that reason, we have national parties that don't really pay attention to certain races like this one. So I see these as an opportunity, and let me explain why. I talk with all kinds of people all the time, and I am mostly looking for things that all of us agree on. And one thing that I'm able to say to folks that they agree with is that, you know, it seems to me neither party is doing a great job taking care of our people. And I get 100% on that. Now, I'm not talking to any Wall Street folks or big pharma or big energy or Silicon Valley folks, because for them, our economy and our government are going just fine. But for the average person, it's not. So the reason I'm running is because I think this race will allow me to make some changes to the Democratic Party. And those changes are, we Democrats need to once again become the party of the people who work. And Democrats also need to return to rural and small town districts like the 1st, the 2nd, the 4th, and the 5th in Kentucky. So that's my purpose for running, and I appreciate you all having me here.
Thank you. First question, and I will remind you, in giving your answers, please also differentiate between yourself and the incumbent. The first question, in your opinion, what are some of the most important issues facing this congressional district?
Most of the people that are in this congressional district are working people. And for the last 30, 40 years, working people have been left out of the incredible increases in prosperity that we're seeing. I mean, the stock market seems to be heading to another planet, but working people have been kept out of that really since the 90s, and maybe even a little bit sooner. Didn't used to be that way. You know, in the 60s, the wealthiest American was J.P. Morgan. He had about $1 billion, maybe a little bit more. It corresponds to roughly 8 or 9 billion now. And he famously said, it's hardly worth being wealthy because the average American has it so good. Well, that was back in the 60s and the 70s. That's not the way it is right now. So that's the biggest issue, I think, facing folks is working people aren't paid enough. They're working longer hours than they should. So once again, I think that the Democrats need to return to speaking very clearly for working people, unionized and others. Mr. Guthrie is a business owner and a right to work kind of guy. I can't speak so much for him, except to tell you that things have not gotten better while he's been representing this district.
Thank you. In what ways do you plan to benefit your congressional district?
You know, the primary thing, first of all, I've never served in a governmental role before. So I will have to do some on the job learning, but my mindset is going to be, how will this help? How will this law that we're working on, how is it going to help working people in the second district? And there are a lot of ways that can happen. For example, a healthcare bill. We'll look at a healthcare bill and decide, is this going to actually help folks who live and work in the second district? Um, so much of our economy and our government are dominated by huge corporations and extremely wealthy individuals. And we need some balance for that. The average American is not being represented. So that will be my focus. How does this help the working people? The irony, of course, is that if we get a robust working middle class going again, that will benefit owners of businesses, that will benefit those that are wealthy. They might have quite as much money as they would like to have, like to see on a chart, on a spreadsheet, but their lives will be better when the rest of us are healthier, um, better educated, and a little bit better off.
Thank you again. What is the most important issue facing this district?
I think it's jobs. It always is jobs. Now we're in the middle of what looks to be in the middle of. We're really at the beginning of what looks to be a new reindustrialization phase. And in the second district, we have two new battery plants that are going in. One that's a $5 billion investment in Glendale, just south of Elizabethtown, and then a $2 billion investment in Warren County outside of Bowling Green. So that's going to not only provide a lot of jobs, I think they said 5,000 jobs in Hardin County. So Hardin County has the potential to become the fastest growing county in the state. Right now it's up there, but it's not. I think the fastest growing county is outside of Cincinnati, and then Warren County has been number 2, but Hardin may leap to the front. And that's going to cause some problems, but it's going to cause all kinds of opportunities. It's going to mean that there will be businesses that set up around serving the battery business. So as we reindustrialize, and by the way, there are other factories being built in Ohio, in New York, and there's a truck factory, a Ford truck plant that's going to go in Tennessee. So we've got this corridor that's beginning from upstate New York, going through Ohio, through Kentucky on down. This is going to be a huge opportunity for us to rebuild the working middle class.
Thank you. What is your position on what is your position on racial equality, and what are some of your suggestions to improve it?
You know, it feels like racial equality is, there's an old story about the frog who's sitting on at one end of a log, and he can only jump halfway to the end of the log. So he jumps halfway and then halfway again and halfway again. The point is he never makes it off the log. And it sort of feels like that. We're not able to really complete the job of having a society where everyone is treated equally, treated fairly, with respect and dignity. I grew up in the time of Dr. Martin Luther King, and so that's closer to my understanding. The idea where we're judged by the content of our character rather than the color of our skin is a really powerful statement for me, and that's the way I tend to view things. There are different approaches now that I can't fully wrap my head around, although I speak with folks about it and ask for their guidance. But we have a ways to go. That said, you know, we are on a path for things to continually get better, but we're not there yet.
Thank you. What are your suggestions to improve election integrity and restore confidence in the process?
Yeah, and boy, it seems like almost every story on the radio that I hear is about election integrity. And um, you know, from a technical standpoint, Kentucky has an advantage because we do have paper ballots, and I think that's an advantage. And during the pandemic, there was cooperation between our Republican Secretary of State, Michael Adams, and our Democratic governor. There was cooperation to make the election, and it appears that the election was fair. Um, Personally, though, I think voting is too difficult. There's too many shenanigans that can go on. You know, in wealthy neighborhoods, you can just walk up to a polling place and vote. And in poor neighborhoods, you might have to wait for hours in line. And I think it's now, I'm not sure, does Kentucky have a law that says you're not allowed even to give water to people that are waiting in line? You're not allowed to save their space in line for them. So I think we can improve voting. You know, the young people I speak with can't believe that we can't vote through our telephones. And I think that's worth considering. Should be much easier for us to do it. Should be a national holiday. Should be as easy as possible for all of us to vote, and our vote should be secure. Technical answers to that, I would have to learn a bit more. I'd have to be more involved, but I basically feel secure about our voting system in Kentucky, rather secure about it. But I understand folks feeling either they're not being allowed to vote, and of course, a lot of Republicans feel that there were abuses, none of which can be proved. It's not, there's no evidence of it, but that causes an erosion in trust. So obviously, it's an important issue. Thank you.
Thank you. What are your views on abortion rights and women's health issues?
We have an anti-abortion amendment to our Kentucky State Constitution that's going to be on the ballot. I think it's Amendment 2, and I'm urging everyone to please vote no on that. That would end any choice for women, even in the case of rape or incest. And so I am pro-choice. At the same time, I agree with the argument that, look, if we've got if we have a fetus, if we have a fertilized embryo, if we leave it alone, chances are pretty good it's going to become a baby. Actually, a lot of them fail, but without our interference, this is very likely to become a human being. At the same time, we have a responsibility to the children we bring into this world. And right now, 40% of children 18 years and under live in poverty. So if we want to reduce abortion, which I think it should be a personal decision, I think we have to encourage people to bring babies to full term. And we can do that with higher wages, with hours that allow people who work time to raise their kids, with better schooling, with a national child care system, with a national preschool system. We can encourage this. I also think even if you want to get rid of abortion, making it totally illegal will not make it illegal. It'll just move it away, and it'll move it to other states, or it'll move it underground to where we can't see it. So I understand the idea. I think human life is sacred, but it goes far beyond being allowed to bring someone to life, to bring someone to birth. Thank you.
Thank you. Please indicate your level of support for law enforcement and the military, especially in light of the fact that your opponent had the opportunity to take the lead in recognizing the Capitol Police and Maryland National Guard, but failed to after January the 6th, 2021.
You know, I was at KET this week on, I think it was Monday night, in Lexington, and one of the people that was appearing at the same time was Jamie Comer, who's the representative from the 1st District. And he said some things I thought were ridiculous, but one thing he said, he got asked about January 6th, and he said, I was there, it was a riot, it was a terrible circumstance. And I appreciate Representative Comer's courage in saying that. I haven't heard that level of clarity from Representative Guthrie. You know, one of the things that gets said from the progressive side of the aisle, and I'm a progressive, by the way, if Bernie Sanders says it, I probably agree, but I'm not an ideologue. I think we need to get all answers on the table if we're going to solve problems. One of the ideas that we hear a lot about is defund the police, and that's just such an oversimplification that it gets misunderstood and misapplied. You know, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be looking at our police. Louisville, unfortunately, became the center of the universe because of police abuse and ultimately the murder of Breonna Taylor. At the same time, we've got cities in the 2nd District where the police are very well connected to the community, and Bowling Green is especially great. And Hardin County, I know some of the police officers in Hardin County, and it appears that everything is really solid there. So I support the police. At the same time, we cannot have corruption in our government provided services. Now, as far as the military goes, I love the people who serve in our military deserve all the support and credit. We do not give them enough support. We do not support them when they return, when they are veterans. But I do have a bone to pick with the Pentagon.
Thank you. In what ways will you work with the current administration to improve the economic situation in America and in the Commonwealth?
You know, working class people, after World War II, when our economy was smashed, as we rebuilt the economy, we had very high taxes for the very, very wealthy at the top end. And we also had strong unions. Back in the 60s, 30% of our workforce was unionized. And there were problems with the union then, but the reality was that working class people had a middle class existence. We had a great setup, and that has been eroded. So I would be focusing on ways that we could strengthen unions. I would encourage unions. I hope that Starbucks, Amazon, I'd really like to see Walmart unionized. You know, Walmart is a tricky one. I shop at Walmart. There's nothing else near me. I'd have to drive an extra half hour to not shop at Walmart, really. And the people that work there are great. And some of them even worked with Sam Walton. But they've taken things too far. They could be such a force for good in this country if they would embrace their workers more and provide more. But if Walmart folks try to unionize, they'll just shut the store. So I'd be strong for unions, strong for working people, and building a partnership between business and people who work.
Thank you. The GOP has consistently threatened Social Security and Medicare. Your opponent claims that he wants to protect them. What measures will you take to protect and enhance Social Security and Medicare?
Well, a couple of things. Social Security right now, in fact, I think we're about to see, have they announced the cost of living adjustment? The COLA cost of living adjustment is due, and it's going to be one of the largest ones in a decade or so because of the inflation that's going on. But unfortunately, there's so much. I spoke to folks in Owensboro who lived on a fixed income in a senior living facility, and they said anytime they get a cost of living adjustment, their rent gets adjusted for the exact amount of their cost of living adjustment. So there's all kinds of abuse of this. We need a stronger Social Security, not a weaker one. And as far as Medicare goes, I would really like to see us move towards a single payer system, more like Medicare for all of us. Our medical system right now costs 19% of our gross domestic product. It's the most expensive medical system in the world, and yet our life expectancies are dropping. We don't have high quality medicine. When you get in front of a doctor, it's a great system, but getting in front of that doctor can be difficult, and it's terrible. But if someone in your family, someone you love, gets sick, that's when you find out how unfair and how terrible our system is, because it can bankrupt you and your family just because someone you love gets sick. That doesn't have to be that way. Certainly not done that way in other nations.
Thank you. What are your recommendations to enact immigration reforms?
This is a hot button issue, of course, and it's very politicized. So, and we're also stuck with having to, what's the old saying? A stitch in time saves nine. Well, we're up to probably 90 stitches are needed at the border. We have extreme suggestions from one side of things. We get the suggestion, let's shut the border down, no immigration whatsoever. And then the other side of things, the suggestion is let's open the borders. We want open borders. A lot of young people speak to me about that. And I suppose someday there's a possibility that our borders, our international borders, should be as easy to cross as it is from Kentucky to Tennessee or Kentucky to Indiana, but not right now. The answer is going to be somewhere in the middle. And it means this tricky job of balancing, and balancing is a tricky thing. As soon as you talk about balance, you're talking about a moving target. You're talking about once you achieve balance, it's going to start changing again. So it'll be a job that's never finished. What needs to be balanced are the needs of the American people, the needs of American business, our national security needs, and of course, the needs of the families that are trying to come across the border. You know, before World War II, I think in 1937, a ship showed up in New York Harbor with 900 European Jews that were trying to escape Nazi Germany, and they were turned away in New York Harbor. Now, we ended up as a nation accepting more Jewish refugees from World War II than any other nation, but that's a black mark on our country that we turned these folks away. So we must treat people humanely at the border. We're going to need to put more effort into it. That's for sure. On the other hand, we're going to see forces at work here that will be very, very difficult to deal with, like climate change, and that's going to cause potentially billions of people to want to move, and our borders will be really stressed when we start to see that happening. So it's going to be a challenge.
Thank you. Your opponent voted against every measure to bring money into the Commonwealth during the Biden administration, including the infrastructure measures. What would you vote? What would your vote have been if you had been in Congress?
My disappointment with those bills was that I thought they were whittled down a little bit too far. They could have gone further. You know, I get asked about deficits, for example, all the time. Aren't you afraid of the deficit? Well, I'm really not afraid of the deficit so much as what we spend money on. We go into debt for all kinds of things. We went into debt maybe $6 trillion for the wars in the Middle East. And one of the big complaints about the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare, was it would cost $1 trillion over 10 years. Well, the Middle East war, the Iraq war, $6 trillion would have been 60 years of the Affordable Care Act. So it matters what we spend it on. I don't mind us going into debt as long as we're responsible about it, to build schools, to build roads, to build bridges, to make the lives of the American people better. This is who our country should be for, is for the American people, not simply for the corporations. And right now, the corporations, the biggest corporations, have way too much control. And the people are being left behind, and that's why we're seeing all this instability in our society.
Thank you. Former President Trump committed several questionable acts before, during, and after his presidency. Your opponent is endorsed by and have taken measures to protect him. How will you ensure that Mr. Trump is held accountable and is brought to justice to prove his innocence or guilt?
This is a tricky thing because our presidents are asked to do things that normal human beings should never be asked to do. When you're the president, you make decisions that are going to determine how many people live or die in a given situation. And this is not a job I don't envy anyone doing this. And so they are given a certain latitude. They're allowed to act in certain ways, because if we threw every president who went sideways into jail, that would be a very difficult thing. On the other hand, when we have presidents who try to twist things to their advantage, and the first example of that is President Nixon that I recall. And I remember the day that Richard Nixon got pardoned, and I knew then, and I had been very interested in politics at that point. Right then, I was furious because I knew this guy was going to completely get away with it and that we would have more of it. And it seems that we've gotten to the ultimate expression of that in President Trump. But I'm going to give President Trump credit. As a friend of mine said once, he's a genius at something. And by the way, Republicans say to me, hey, just because we vote for him doesn't mean we like him. And another Republican said to me, hey, I wouldn't want him as a neighbor. But here's what he did. He saw people that have been ignored by the Democratic Party and even by the Republican Party as well. He saw them, he acknowledged them, he accepted them. Not that he'd show up to their house for dinner, not that he would show up in Muhlenberg County or have a meal with them, but he at least acknowledged them. And that is, again, why it's important for the Democratic Party to make connections again in rural and working America.
Thank you. What are some other ideas that you have not been asked about yet?
Well, I think we haven't talked about broadband. When you get out into rural America, the difficulties during the pandemic were extreme. You know, we had Kentuckians who were loading their kids up into the back of the pickup truck to go park over at McDonald's and sit there for 45 minutes or an hour so the kids could do their homework because their homework was online. Uh, Broadband is now a requirement for modern life. You can't apply for a job at Target without having access to being online. This also, by the way, applies to proper cell phone coverage. We don't have proper cell phone coverage across the state. And I'm not completely in love with the approach that our current Democratic Party is taking, which is they want to subsidize corporate profits to encourage them to go into areas that aren't served well. By the way, we have city areas, of course, that don't have proper broadband either. But we need to end that. We need to put this in. If it were up to me, the kind of program I would be proposing would be more like the rural electric cooperatives, where we allow local groups to borrow money at very low interest rates to build their own infrastructure so that they've got their own internet set up in their county. And there's some counties that are doing this. And I would do the same in the cities. I've also proposed that the post office could be in charge of broadband across the country. That's historically the post office's job has been communication. And by the way, I pitched that to Congressman John Yarmuth. This idea came from a friend of mine. It's not my idea. I listen to everybody else I can. I don't have that many original ideas, but I listen to folks. And Rich Campbell gave this to me, and I sent it to John Yarmuth, and he was very, very interested in it. So we do have to be a bit more creative about how we solve problems, but we can do it.
Thank you. Please give us examples of you working with others in a bipartisan manner.
Well, I guess the best example, just from first of all, I live in a neighborhood that all my neighbors are Republicans. And you know, some of them vote for me. They come up and they whisper that they voted for me. They ask me not to tell anybody, so I can't share their names with you. And they'll drop whatever they're doing. You know, when I live in the city, if I ask someone for help on Monday, a good answer is, how about Wednesday at 4? That's a good answer. But out here in the country, when you ask someone for help, your neighbor will say, you know, he'd be in the middle of rebuilding an engine and say, let me wash my hands, and they'll come and help you right away. So there's a different sort of community that goes on out here in the country. And even among all these Republicans, there's only one of them that calls me a communist to my face. So I have learned to talk with these folks and to accept them and love them. And I think that they accept and love me as well. In my work, I worked in the music business, and a big piece of the music business is collaboration. You learn how to work with people. And it's not the same thing as compromise. Collaboration is you're working together to build something. So that's just the way we do it in the music business. And I can foresee that that would be the way I would work in Congress. I like getting this person introduced to that person and helping them work together. I love being part of that. So I would be an enabler to get these groups to start talking to each other. And where it's not possible to work together in Congress sometimes, I think Brett Guthrie is confined by a Republican Party that just says vote no on everything. If it's Democratic, just vote no. So he's confined by that. And where I would be different, even if my party said you need to vote no or yes or vote a certain way, I'd be coming into the district and talking with folks here. I'd be looking for input from folks on the ground, Republicans, Democrats, my neighbors, everybody. All right.
Thank you. Who will be the prime driver of your positions and votes in Congress?
That's interesting. Well, I should have brought the book in here to show you. My favorite book of the last 8 years or so is a book by Thomas Frank. It's called Listen Liberal. Tom Frank wrote a book called What's the Matter with Kansas, and then one called The Wrecking Crew. And those were books complaining about the Republican Party, but the last chapter was about, and Democrats ain't so great either. So his next book was all about some tough love for Democrats. And that's that book, Listen Liberal. So he's been a guiding light to me. I think he has it down to very deep details. I would encourage anybody, if you haven't read that book, the title is the worst part. I don't want to be scolded before I even start reading the book. So it took me a year or so to read it. The book was written in 2016. It still feels ahead of its time. There are also various political thinkers that I would be recruiting to at least advise me. I'd want to hear their opinions. And they're spread out all over. Um, when you're trying to build consensus or to work together with people, you need to hear from all sides as much as possible. You need to game it out. And maybe there's a great story I can share, but I can't do it in 20 seconds. But I'll share with you a great story about how it's unpredictable how we get to the right answer. But that has been my experience in music, and I think we have to be willing to accept that as we allow people to once again have some say in how their government and their economy runs.
Thank you. That concludes our question and answer portion. Now, Mr. Linderman, you have 2 minutes to summarize.
Well, I think I have summarized, I say the same thing over and over again, which is Democrats need to reconnect with working people. I need to point some things out about Mr. Guthrie, who's always a very nice person to me. He's always very nice, and everyone sees him as a nice person. When he entered Congress, though, according to OpenSecrets.org, he was worth $422,000. That was his net worth in 2009. By 2017-18, somewhere in there, he had gotten up to $7.4 million. That's an increase of 15 times. His family's business had gotten friendly Small Business Administration loans that cost the American taxpayer, us, $500,000. He sat on a congressional committee that heard and decided the future of aluminum. His family's business is aluminum. And worst of all, in 2020, that business got the largest PPP loan of any business in the United States owned by a government official, even ahead of President Trump. This was 2020. President Trump had a business that got 2.8 million. Brett's company got $4.37 million. Now, I want to point out none of this is illegal, but I think it's corruption. I think it's wrong for government officials to put themselves to the head of the line to get benefits. And by the way, after he got the largest PPP loan in the country for any business owned by a government official, he then voted against additional PPP support for the rest of us, for working people. So, and that corruption is small ball corruption. The real corruption is that Brett Guthrie serves large pharmaceutical companies, large energy companies, large wealthy individuals, large wealthy corporations and individuals. So I would be much more focused on supporting those of us who work, those of us who use our bodies as well as our minds to work. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We thank the candidate, Mr. Linderman, for participating. We ask that you, the voter, consider what he said tonight before making a decision. Do not simply vote because you know someone or because someone else refers a candidate to you or because you're in a particular party. Use the information presented to make an informed decision. Thank you. And on behalf of the Greater Hardin County Women's Network and the Hardin County branch of the NAACP, have a blessed weekend.